First, I would like to introduce you our guest today, Beatriz Mattos from Plataforma CIPÓ. Plataforma CIPÓ is a Brazil-based research institute dedicated to promoting international cooperation to advance climate action and sustainable development, with a focus on the needs and priorities of Global South. Ümit Şahin is a senior scholar and coordinator of climate change studies at Istanbul Policy Center at Sabancı University. So I met Beatriz recently in Bonn, and I know their work about climate diplomacy, and they have followed the COP30 process very closely. And I'm following Ümit since years, and we are benefiting in Turkey a lot from his work on climate change policies. It's a pleasure to host you today, both of you, and I'm sure it will be a nice webinar. For the guests, a brief reminder. We have a Q&A session and also chat. You can use both to ask questions. We will start with my questions, but we aim to leave no questions unanswered at the end of the webinar. I would like to start with Beatriz. It has been, I think, over 8 months after the end of COP30. And I would like to ask you, how do you evaluate the COP30 and the Brazilian presidency's agenda? What did it deliver and where did it fall short?
So thank you so much, Jan, and thank you to the Energy Ball Foundation for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, and as Jan said, my name is Beatriz. I am project and research coordinator at Plataforma CIPÓ, a Brazilian think tank dedicated to advancing climate action. So, Jan, I think that 8 months on, I would evaluate COP30 through the lens of the 3 priorities established by the Brazilian presidency. The first one, reinforcing multilateralism at a time of deep crisis of global governance. The second one, connecting the climate regime to people's lives. And finally, the third one, accelerating implementation. So on the first priority, multilateralism, Brazil was largely successful, in my view. At a time of a growing geopolitical divisions and tensions and skepticism toward international cooperation, COP30 reaffirmed the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and its Paris Agreement, and demonstrated that consensus-based climate governance remains viable. So the conference approved 56 decisions by consensus and advanced issues such as gender, technology, the integration of human rights, indigenous rights into climate governance. So for the second priority on connecting climate action to people's lives, COP30 also delivered, in my view, important progress. The presidency expanded participation through initiatives such as the People's Circle, the Global Ethical Stocktake, while engaging with finance ministries, business, and other economic actors through the Finance Circle. But it also introduced innovations such as the Special Envoys, the Advisory Councils, and a major reform of the action agenda, trying to connect it to the global stocktake, which is the stocktake aimed to evaluate the progress that countries are making in achieving the objectives of the Paris Agreement, the temperature limitation objectives of the Paris Agreement. So I think these actions helped to broaden ownership of the climate action beyond negotiators, trying to connect better with people's real lives. And finally, the third priority of the Brazilian presidency and the most ambitious objective around implementation. I think this one produced mixed results. So in my view, COP30 shifted the conversation from new pledges through delivery, introducing innovations such as the Global Implementation Accelerator, the Mission 1.5, and advancing the Baku to Belém roadmap to climate finance, face the very low ambition decision we had of the new collective finance, the NCKG, in the previous COP. So we also had the global multi-round decision that sent an important political signal that the focus on the climate regime should now be implementation. So based at these three priorities, I think the results were mixed. So we still had many outcomes remaining voluntary, procedural, or only oriented toward future action rather than immediate action that we need right now. So for example, the latest NDCs, which are the national determined contributions that countries need to present every 5 years to present their mitigation and adaptation goals, remain highly insufficient to close the gap to 1.5 degrees in terms of temperature. And on transition away from fossil fuels, which is an extremely difficult topic to be approached within the negotiations, progress took place through only voluntary basis outside of the formal negotiations rooms. So right now we have the roadmap, which is at least an output, I believe. However, it was not a negotiated decision. The second limitation, in my view, concerns to institutionalization. Many of the presidency's innovations, such as the mobilization cycle, advisory councils, and the special envoys, were influential at some extent, but remain highly presidence-driven. So we have a question of whether future COP presidencies will build on them and integrate these initiatives more firmly into the climate regime formal structure. So basically for me, COP30 greatest contribution was not a single negotiated outcome, although we had a very big one in my view, which was just transitions, but the attempt to redefine climate multilateralism around implementation.
Thank you, Beatriz. A brief reminder for our guests. You can find the first webinar we did with, again, a guest from Plataforma CIPÓ, dear Marilia Klos, her full name, and Professor Semra Cirit, which has been, again, an introduction about COP30, COP31 transition. Now I'm turning to Ümit. Ümit, what do you think are the most important things COP31 inherits from Belém? And what risks getting lost in this handover between two presidencies?
Thank you, Cem, and thanks for inviting me first. A very pleasure to be here. So I think the most important thing COP31 inherited from Belém is a little bit unexpected because I think this is the roadmaps. Of course, together with the elevated action agenda, as Beatriz already said, the action agenda was a success in Belém, but roadmaps was something very new. As you know, in Belém, Brazilian presidency started quite ambitious in the beginning, at least in terms of narrative, and especially on deforestation, but to some extent on the phasing out of fossil fuels. But as you know, this immediately created an agenda fight. So the Brazilian presidency's response was quite creative. And instead of insisting to push this for formal negotiations, they created a new kind of a presidency-led track outside the mandated negotiation process. Because until Belém, the only major non-negotiated track was the action agenda. But then Brazil added new initiatives, including the Belém 1.5 mission, the roadmaps of fossil fuel and deforestation, and the Global Implementation Accelerator. This was an interesting and important innovation because, as you know, the negotiations are not merely led by the presidencies. Negotiations are with all the countries, and it's based on consensus. But because these implementation tracks are mainly led by the presidencies, then it expanded the role of the COP presidency. Now, of course, the next presidencies, including the Turkish presidency, must somehow carry forward these additional implementation initiatives, right? So this is, at least until last year, this was quite unexpected. I think, in parentheses, maybe I need to add that this new approach has some advantages, but also risks. On the positive side, it kept the fossil fuel agenda and broader mitigation ambition alive despite the political deadlock. And it also created new kind of leadership among countries of willing, or how to call it, the coalition of willing, etc. And especially the Santa Marta process, the fossil fuel conference process, was kind of it's another it emerged directly from this new approach. But on the other side, there are some disadvantages or risks. I think this shift attention maybe away from the formal negotiations toward presidency-led initiatives is creating a new kind of a multi-layered, multi-track, kind of a multilateralism. This may help save climate ambition in the long run, but it also risks fragmenting the international climate regime. So if that fragmentation goes too far, so it could eventually undermine the Paris Agreement itself. So I think the consensus-based negotiation has its own merits, so we don't want to lose it. So that's why I tell the roadmaps is the most important thing inherited from Belém to Turkish presidency. Now, Turkish presidency now is also because of the Turkey, Australia common presidential agreement. Turkey is mostly responsible of the action agenda, so Turkey is elevating the action agenda more because, you know, the Brazilian presidency already did a good job to create all these 6 axes and to make it more important, the implementation. Now, Turkey is kind of continuing this work by identifying 10 priority areas, etc. But secondly, now Turkey has to keep new presidency-led initiatives, as I said before, especially the roadmaps. But there is no any sign about yet that if they do that or not. I think the roadmap idea was innovative, but also it was a kind of a failure to keep it in the formal negotiation agenda. But anyway, this is another discussion. Maybe we can do it later on. One thing I need to say about that is what I heard in Bonn, that the Brazilian presidency wants Turkish presidency to save both the fossil fuel and deforestation agenda through political endorsement rather than introducing it to the negotiation agenda. That we all know that it's impossible because of Saudi Arabia and other countries. They don't want a tough agenda or deforestation agenda especially tough agenda in the formal negotiations. Instead, the Brazilian presidency wants Antalya to generate a political momentum, perhaps through a presidential event or another high-level initiative, and encourage more countries to endorse the roadmaps. There is one important problem about that, and you all know that the Turkish government has not endorsed the fossil fuel roadmap yet. So more than 100 countries signed that, but Turkey is still trying to say that we are a neutral presidential role, etc. So they are still away from that. But we expect Turkey to endorse the tough roadmap as soon as possible, especially since Australia already did that. Of course, we also can talk about just transition work program, etc., but we can talk about it later. I don't want to make it too longer. Global goal adaptation is also important. It was one of the important initiatives in Belém, but I think this agenda will be more relevant, not in Antalya, but in Addis Ababa next year, probably. So the biggest risk, in your question, biggest risk in the handover from Belém to Antalya would be losing momentum on the fossil fuel roadmap, I think, and deforestation roadmap.
Thank you, Ümit. Yeah, the climate regime is going through a tough geopolitical context. Maybe the creativity of the Brazilian presidency might bring about some results if in this year and the following years we manage to keep the transition away from fossil fuels agenda alive. And so I would also like to ask you one more question. Beyond just transition, because we will dive deeper into this later on, what kind of transition agenda is expected from the COP31 presidency? So Turkey is not endorsing the transition away from fossil fuels agenda, but it has an ambitious electrification target, and it's approaching from a different angle, with a relevant framework. So its flagship proposal is a global electrification target, we can say. What is it, and what could it deliver at the end of the day, being part of the action agenda?
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic, but I try to be short, hopefully. Now, first, I need to start with the logic of action agenda, because the electrification agenda is part of the action agenda. Normally, action agenda initiatives are not based on consensus. They are launched by the COP presidency, but they still need broad international support if they are to become truly global initiatives. So probably the most successful example about that was the tripling renewable energy and doubling energy efficiency initiative, which was accepted in COP28 in Dubai. And it was launched by the UAE presidency with the support of IEA. But they gathered a large number of endorsements at COP28. So later on, during the COP, those targets were incorporated into the global stocktake decision together with tough decision, and that was a very important moment. Also because it was very important because fossil fuel was mentioned first time in the COP decision, but also it was very important because it showed that the action agenda can actually feed into the formal negotiation agenda. Now, after the Brazilian presidency expanded the role of action agenda, of course, it's become much more important. As I said before, also because Turkey's role in this Turkey-Australia thing, in terms of share of responsibilities, let's say, action agenda is under Turkey's role. So Turkey wants to emphasize the shift from mitigation to implementation. The idea is that we have already negotiated the targets, and now the challenge is to find how to implement it, etc. So in Bonn, Turkey presented the 10 action agenda priorities: clean energy transition, zero waste, green industrialization, etc. But also Turkey announced some new global targets, particularly the global electrification target, as you said. This is the basically 35 to 35 targets to increasing the electrification's share to 35% until 2035 in the final energy demand. So it's not based on a electricity production target, it's a consumption target, but it's still important because share of electricity in the final demand means it doesn't automatically mean producing by renewables, but practically it means producing more on renewables. Everybody thinks about that. So as a result, Turkey announced this new target, but with the support of IRENA and IEA, but without any large support from other countries, right? So not from EU, not from other big parties. So as a result, Turkey made electrification the central theme of the COP31. Now, because they announced it quite early in Bonn, so now they have to build this broad international support around electrification agenda. So it may not be easy to include the electrification target to the formal negotiations, as already know, because China, India, and many countries doesn't really support this kind of new target in the negotiations. So this will probably stay in the action agenda, but there can be some innovative ways to put it in the more formal part of the COP, maybe not the mandated part, but like a cover decision or etc. So there can be several other ways to do that to make it more important than action agenda. But I think the real challenge is for Turkish presidency is to build enough political momentum and enough international support for electrification. Yeah, if you want me to give some more details about electrification, as I said, today's electrification rate is around 20% all over the world. In some countries, close to 30%, but in most countries, including Turkey, EU, etc., it is 20%. So 35% until 2035 is a quite ambitious target. But this position aligns with tripling renewable energy and doubling energy efficiency targets. It's clearly said that. And also electrification, the presidency, Turkish presidency clearly said that this electrification target is simultaneously connected with decarbonization, 1.5 degrees goal, energy security, the most important to this in this geopolitical circumstances. It is based also very much related to energy security. It's based on implementation. It's based on cross-sectoral transformation together with buildings, industry, transport, etc., etc. So, in this sense, it's quite important. But because Turkey announced it quite early, this is creating some other challenges. Maybe we can discuss this later on.
Thank you, Ümit. Right here, I would like to continue about Turkey's possible attitude regarding the transition away from fossil fuel stance. So, do you think the Turkish presidency can carry the fossil fuel transition roadmap forward?
Yeah, that's the key question.
Yeah.
I like to talk about it a lot. Sometimes I'm speculating, but let me speculate a little bit. This is the key question, as I said. And many people in the climate community are quite skeptical, and they think that Turkey has not endorsed a tough roadmap, and they assume that as the incoming COP presidency, they will avoid taking such a politically sensitive issue forward. But there are some other signs. Okay, so maybe I'm too optimistic, but there are some signs. At least there are some optimistic signs that we can follow. Over the past several months, Turkey has focused on implementation, of course, all these 10 priorities, etc. And they propose this global electrification target. At the first sight, this is like a different agenda from transitioning away from fossil fuels. But I see that this electrification target as a kind of a bridge between implementation and the political ambition. So the transition away from fossil fuels is not just another implementation issue, it's probably the most ambitious political commitment. Okay, so since the Paris Agreement. So if you really implement tough, so it's ambition, not implementation only, it's raising ambition. So I think implementation and in terms of electrification agenda and tough should reinforce each other. And the interesting part of that is that the Turkish presidency consistently linked electrification with the tough, not always very openly, but sometimes by implying, sometimes openly. Okay, so Murat Kurum, president designate of COP31, has repeatedly presented electrification as complementary to the GST goals, tripling renewable energy, doubling energy efficiency, but also tough is a GST goal, right? So he repeatedly said this, and he also argued. It was in where was that? It was in Petersburg dialogue, I guess. He argued that the recent energy crises have shown that fossil fuels cannot guarantee energy security. It was very exclusively against using fossil fuels. Of course, they don't say tough or they don't say phase out or anything like that, but they say, at least they imply something in this way. So the presidency's own narrative already connects electrification, renewable energy, energy security, and transition away from fossil fuels. So I think that gives us an opportunity for COP31. In terms of handing over the tough roadmap, not agenda, but the tough roadmap to Turkish presidency by the Brazilians, I don't think that it's going to be part of the formal negotiations, but there are many other ways, I think, to keep the roadmap alive. I think this is the most important mission of the Turkish presidency today. It could be advanced through the electrification agenda, like directly linking electrification with the tough roadmap, through the Just Transition Work Program. It could be incorporated somehow to the Just Transition Work Program with the roadmap, through preparations for the second global stocktake, because as you know, the second GST will be discussed also in the discussions of the second GST will start in Antalya. Also, even in the somewhere in the negotiations, there could be some recommendations to the countries for the national tough roadmaps, right? Because this is one of the most important things in the tough roadmap, which was announced by the Brazilians. So I think this needs a political support from Turkish presidency. I don't personally think that Turkey is preparing to block the tough agenda, but the question is how shall we really build the political momentum around it? I mean, Turkey cannot do this alone, and they don't want to do it alone. They need a lot of collaboration from other parties, but also from civil society around, etc. So I think, first of all, European Union and the UK and other, including Brazil and other progressive parties, let's say, must somehow collaborate with Turkish presidency to advance a tough agenda together with the electrification agenda. I think this is one of the ways, but also civil society. This is something I discussed a lot in Bonn with our colleagues from different international civil society organizations, that I think the civil society must not be, how to call it, cynical about the role of Turkish presidency. They really need to push for more progressive outcomes, including the tough agenda. I think this is still a possibility. As I said in the beginning, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I still think this is a possibility. We still have this possibility to move the tough roadmap forward from Antalya.
Thank you, Ümit. Of course, we are talking about the role of Turkey, but the president of negotiations is Australia. Maybe in future we will have the opportunity to discuss the role of Australia specifically as well. And yeah, if your optimistic scenario becomes real somehow, maybe then we might expect Turkey to announce a roadmap for own coal phase out, for example, or improvements in the NDC and some more concrete steps, because this would fit better with a diplomatic role that is progressive better. So I would like to continue with Beatriz. Ümit mentioned the role of civil society. I would like to ask you, how did civil society engage with COP30 presidency and the host role, and what worked or proved difficult in that relationship?
Well, thank you, Jan. I think that one of the most distinctive features of the COP30 presidency was the efforts to put social participation at the center of the conference, with all of the limitations that we faced. So this was part of its broader goal of connecting climate diplomacy to people's lives, as we said, the second priority of the COP30 presidency. And of course, moving beyond a process driven only by negotiators and governments. So civil society engagement happened through different channels, official and non-official. The presidency created spaces such as the circles, as we said, the People Circle and the Global Ethical Stock Take. But it also opened calls for submissions to civil society, observers and non-observers organizations on key topics and initiatives such as the roadmap on TAF, on deforestation, but also the Baku to Belém roadmap, which was a shared initiative of the presidency to try to fill the gap between climate finance since the decision of the new collective climate finance goal. So Belém also saw an unprecedented mobilization with thousands of indigenous participants, with many people taking part of the Green Zone, a large public demonstrations and cultural events. So I think that what worked was the expansion of participation. Civil society was treated, in my view, of course, not only as an observer, but as a source of knowledge, of legitimacy, as a real actor that can provide solutions to the climate problems. So we have the visibility and leadership of indigenous peoples, traditional communities, and other frontline groups, which was particularly important. In what comes the main challenges, I think that is to translate this visibility and this active listening that COP30 profiled into influence within the formal negotiation process. I mean, while participation was broad, it was not always clear how the ideas and proposals coming from civil society would shape negotiations or the implementation outcomes. So I think we had a very good process of listening, of opening by the COP30 presidency. However, we still do not have institutional structures within the UNFCCC, the climate regime, to make sure that the demands and the proposals of civil society are implemented in the decisions, but also in climate action as a whole. So I think civil society participation was extremely important, and I'm quite sure that if we didn't have it, very ambitious decisions such as the just transition would not come true. And I'm not talking only about the 2 weeks of COP, but the whole process that occurred during the whole year. Civil society pressure was very, very important to make this come true.
Okay, thank you, Beatriz. So we are coming to our just transition topic. So it sounds to me this transition away from fossil fuels and electrification, these terms operate in a more economic, technical niveau. One is focusing more where we are coming from, and the other one, the electrification, where we are going to in terms of how the industry functions, how, as said, the economy and technique is working. But when it comes to people's lives, as you said, and the social aspects of the issue, just transition as a term expresses this big transition better or in a more comprehensive way. For our audience meeting this for the first time, this term just transition, what was actually agreed in Belém on just transition? And what is this mechanism meant to do? And why does it matter for us heading towards COP31? And COP31 is expected, if there will be one single decision, it's expected this is expected to be the just transition decision. So.
Yes, COP30 approved the first decision under the Just Transition Work Program. The program was created in 2023 with the objectives of strengthening the global response against climate change, based in the two main principles of the convention, which are the Climate Convention, which are the principles of equity and the most known principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. All this in light of different national circumstances. So in Belém, we had the first decision under the Just Transition Work Program, and it was a very important decision, not only because this program will close in COP31, and countries still need to negotiate if its mandate will be renovated or not, but also because the decision represents an important milestone in advancing human, environmental, indigenous rights agenda within the UNFCCC process, within the convention process, which has always been very technical and might be seen as disconnected from real people's lives. So building on the outcomes of previous dialogues under the Just Transition Work Program, the decision established common principles for just transitions. And it was important because until before COP30, we didn't have a multilateral and consensus-based definition on what just transitions would mean. So the decision establishes these common principles across sectors, emphasizing the development-oriented emphasis of just transitions, the whole of economy and whole of society approaches that should guide just transition efforts. It also emphasized social protection and participation, energy access, affordability, and of course the protection of human rights, environmental rights, and rights of indigenous peoples, local communities, and people of African descent. In addition, the decision recognizes the need to address financial and technical constraints faced by developing countries and highlights the essential role of international cooperation including finance, access to context-appropriate technologies to accelerate transitions and maximize the creation of jobs. Importantly, this decision also mandated, as you said, Jen, the establishment of a just transition mechanism. The mechanism aims to be operationalized by COP31 in Antalya. So I agree with you when you say that the mechanism maybe is the most expected decision for COP31. And the idea is that the mechanism works to enhance international cooperation, technical assistance, capacity building, and knowledge sharing. And that it is implemented in a way that builds on and complements existing initiatives, both within the Climate Convention, but also outside the Climate Convention, such as just transition initiatives carried out by multilateral development banks, for example, right? We have just transition initiatives under the ILO, the International Labour Organizations. So the mechanism should also play a role of trying to connect and make all of these transition efforts more coherently addressed within the convention, right? Yes, so the idea here is that we had an important decision that not only put emphasis on an important definition of just transitions that we didn't have until that time, but also provides important tools to make just transition efforts implementable, especially for developing countries. And I think that the main point is not only to discuss climate action per se, but the quality of climate action. Because with all of these principles, it's very clear that mitigation and adaptation efforts cannot be developed and carried out at the expense of rights of people, of rights of biodiversity, and so on. So basically, it is what the COP30 decision says, and our expectations is that we have finally the launch of this mechanism in COP31 in Antalya.
Thank you, Beatriz. This is also very important for the communities in Turkey. In the there are regions of which the economies are based on fossil fuels, and but still the conditions are also ripe for energy transition. But the social aspects of this transformation needs to be addressed as well. So we might hope for concrete outcomes from COP31, which would also benefit the different communities in Turkey. And one more question to you, Beatriz, about this. The SB64 meeting in Bonn ended without a draft decision. And so what's the difference between the parties' approaches, and what did cause this stagnation in the negotiations? So what's this disagreement about?
Yeah, this is a very important question. Although in Belém, parties agreed with this decision, negotiations on the mechanism structure remain unresolved. And we had the expectation that we'll leave Bonn with at least a draft on what the mechanism would look like, but it didn't happen. At the Bonn Climate Conference, countries were unable to reach an agreement on the mechanism governance, functions, or institutional design. And this is because the language of the Belém decision was very wide, and it can incorporate more ambitious proposals, such as the proposals that developing countries are defending and civil society organizations are defending, and much less ambitious proposals. So basically, the core disagreement concerns its mandate. Some developed countries favor a light mechanism focused only on coordination, knowledge sharing, and technical assistance, avoiding thus new institutional structures or any financial obligation. On the other hand, many developing countries and civil society organizations argue that the mechanism should play a more constructive and substantive role by facilitating, at least facilitating, access to climate finance, technology transfer, and co-development, and capacity building, which of course are recognized in the language of the Climate Convention as essential means of implementation for climate action. Without it, countries cannot implement their goals on climate action. So despite these differences, there is a growing convergence among civil society organizations around at least 3 key functions for the mechanism. The first one is about supporting implementation through finance, technology, and capacity building. And this is a function that developed countries don't want to hear about, only capacity building for them. The second one, promoting inclusive participation in transition process. This is extremely relevant, especially for frontline communities. What we propose is that social groups that are at the front line of transition process and initiatives can have an institutional space within the mechanism to bring their demands, to bring their experiences of good just transition initiatives, but also their bad experiences with transition initiatives that were not made in a just and inclusive way. What unfortunately, we have many examples, especially in developing countries. The third role that the mechanism should exercise will be improving coordination among existing initiatives within and outside the Climate Convention to reduce fragmentation, because we already know that we have many different just transition initiatives across different international forums. So basically the idea is that the mechanism can centralize the efforts that have been developed and try to bring some coherence to them, right? So I believe that a real strong outcome in Antalya would be a mechanism that goes beyond dialogue and becomes a practical tool for implementation. It means that it should help developing countries access financial resources, technologies that are context viable, capacities need to deliver just transitions. And we are not only talking about reskilling and upskilling programs. These, of course, are very important to make the workers that are leaving fossil fuels industry and make them get in new renewable energies industries and so on. But we are talking about a much broader project of just transitions. We are talking about a new development framework capable of address inequalities both within and between countries, capable of deliver real, effective, and just climate action. So I think these are our main recommendations to the mechanism that should be built in Antalya.
Thank you, Beatriz. Focusing on the frontline communities you mentioned, and whose participation you think and whose inclusion you think is important, what would an unjust transition look like? So what would be the costs of an unjust transition that happens through market mechanisms, without regulations or without policies targeting specifically the social aspects of this transformation?
I think that we are already paying high costs of unjust transition initiatives. As you said, usually we have developing countries, particularly local communities, paying the high prices for climate action. I mean, we have the market mechanisms, we have many transition projects that are being held in the territories of local communities and of indigenous peoples. They are facing the high burden of these transitions right now, especially in developing countries, not only, but especially in developing countries. So the discussions about just transitions started basically with the advocacy efforts of labor organizations. And of course, this group is also highly impacted by transitions, especially if they are conducted in the wrong way. But for countries such as Brazil, just transitions affect not only formal workers. Differently than this, we have a big number of informal workers of local communities that is highly affected by these just transition initiatives, not just at all. So it means a just transition means that we have to create mechanisms and strategies that help us to balance the risks and opportunities that can come from these transitions. So,
Thank you, Beatriz. And Ümit, I would like to ask you also the same question. So what would an unjust transition look like? Maybe focusing on the case for Turkey. And what does just transition means? What would that mean in Turkey's own coal regions? What would civil society here demand from the presidency regarding just transition COP? If we will call it a just transition COP, what's the expectancy of the civil society? Yeah.
First of all, I agree with what Beatrice said about the just transition in general. I think the same way. But I tend to answer a little bit differently, maybe a bit more, let's say, by definition, something, or more theoretically. So we all know that the concept of just transition is coming from the labor movement, historically. But today it's become much broader. So it's not only about the workers now, but at the end it's really about the climate justice, right? So we all know that if climate action makes some parts of society poorer, more vulnerable, more disadvantaged, etc., so it cannot be considered as a successful climate action, right? And also it would go against the very logic of Paris Agreement. That's important. It's not only about our it's not only about the activists or experts. All the countries signed or approved the Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement is not only about reducing emissions. Paris Agreement is built on the principles of human rights, the rights of indigenous people, gender equality, food security, ecosystem integrity, etc., etc. So, just transition in reality is the practical implementation of the Paris Agreement. That's not an option. So, we all know the climate justice starts from a very simple observation. Those who are historically and currently most responsible for climate change are not paying the price or highest price, and the greatest burdens fall on those who contributed the least, etc. And this is not only about the countries, this is also within the countries, between different social groups, classes, income groups, genders, etc. And the richest part of the societies produce most of the emissions, and the poorest part of the societies and globally, vulnerable people suffer the most, right? So that's the main definition of climate justice or injustice. So just transition is, as I said in the beginning, is the central theme of the Paris Agreement. It's not only because it's mentioned in the preamble, but also it is the core value. And it combines two ideas. First idea is transition. So we need to move from a fossil fuel economy to a decarbonized economy, to a renewable-based economy. The second, this transition has to protect workers, local communities, vulnerable groups, etc. So, in other words, you need a plan for transition, and alongside the plan, you need policies to make this transition socially just. So now I'm going back to the definition part later, but let's look at the problem in Turkey first. First of all, Turkey doesn't have a real, genuine transition plan. As you all know, Turkey has an NDC, but this NDC mainly focuses on expanding renewable energy, improving energy efficiency, making industry less carbon intensive, promoting public transport, etc., buildings, etc. Those are all good, positive measures, but increasing these renewables, etc., does not automatically mean transition, because in a growing economy like Turkey, you can increase renewables, but the fossil fuels also continue to grow, right? So if you don't really aim at real transition, even the National Energy Plan does not have any real fossil fuel phase-out pathway. There is no coal phase-out, as you all know, as a policy. And even in 2053, which is the net zero year for Turkey, there is no still coal phase-out or no fossil fuel phase-out plan for. And it's not consistent, of course, with the net zero in 2053, but this is the problem. So the biggest problem is if you don't have a real transition strategy, how can you have a just transition? That's the main problem. Always we talk about that for years. I'm coming back to your question about how the transition may be unjust, right? So you ask something like that. I would say that a real transition cannot be unjust because of the very definition I said in the beginning about the Paris Agreement. Because the real transition means phasing out fossil fuels, closing coal mines, oil and gas fields, pipelines, all the fossil fuel infrastructure, etc. And that would eliminate a lot of environmental, health, social problems, etc. associated with the fossil fuel economy. But the real danger comes from when there is no plan at all for transition, as Beatriz already said. If governments simply leave everything to markets or market forces, then coal mines, coal power plants, or internal combustion engine automobile factories, etc., may eventually close because of technological and economic change. But without planning, workers, families, local communities will pay the price. And this would create an injustice. And I think I wouldn't really call this an unjust transition, because this is an absence of transition. It's simply an unmanaged economic transformation, but a real transition in terms of our Paris Agreement goals, etc., by definition has to be planned, has to be exactly just transition. So, very briefly on COP31, I don't think that the presidencies, Turkey and Australia, want to call this COP as a just transition COP. They avoid it, obviously. But of course, civil society, especially the CAN International, continue to push for BAM, this Belém action mechanism. Sorry, now it is Belém Antalya mechanism. It was Belém action mechanism in Belém. It's now Belém Antalya mechanism. I think civil society must really follow this idea, Belém Antalya mechanism, with a real finance responsibility for the developed countries. That's very important, although quite challenging, I know. But also civil society, I think, should continue to insist for a real transition, must also be a just transition. Because otherwise, we also mean that's why I'm so skeptical about this unjust transition, because otherwise we mean that this kind of a transition to renewable economy might be harmful for the communities in the long term, right? So maybe short term a little bit for some local communities, but in the long term it would be much beneficial for everybody. Last thing, of course, this shouldn't come only from the environmental NGOs, but the trade unions first and foremost, local communities, farmers, citizens, local citizens need to also demand a just transition, and it should be a people's transition, of course.
Thank you, Ümit. I also have the feeling that the Turkish attitude is much more like, let's don't make much emphasis on setting ambitions, and we don't need new goals and so on, just focus on implementation. But the question comes, what we will implement at the end of the day. So it's again about the goals. So I would like to ask you one more thing, and then I will turn to the questions. Our guests can write their questions to Q&A session and or chat, which they prefer. One thing I would like to ask is about this word implementation. So I understand, also being a pragmatic person in my own life, rather than talking, doing is better sometimes. That's understandable. But in each agenda item, maybe in climate diplomacy, there is now debates about who will pay, and under the conditions of increasing military expenditures all over the world, maybe. So the question, who will pay? Do you think it's a big challenge, and maybe the biggest challenge in front of the climate regime, and how to overcome this? How can we overcome this challenge? So is it realistic that we can expect an agreement between parties on who will pay actually? So for Beatriz and Ümit, who would like to answer? Maybe both of you. And then I will open the floor to questions. Beatriz and Ümit, you might have questions to each other. From Brazil and Turkey perspectives, there might be things you would like to ask. And also our guests here, they might have questions. So this is my last question to both of you.
Thank you so much, Jan. About your question on who will pay for just transitions, of course, we need to recognize that we are in the middle of a very challenging context in what comes finance, right? But we have many different data showing that we have money enough but money is not being channeling for things that are the most important ones. So, of course, we are totally aware about the fact that you don't have the United States in the convention or in the Paris Agreement anymore. It puts more pressure on other global north countries, such as countries of the European Union, Japan, and so on, to pay more for climate action, right? And maybe try to enforce a mechanism that will count with additional and new financial resources can be a little bit unrealistic right now. But what we are trying to defend is that this new mechanism at least helps streamlines the financial flows that we already have, and in our perspective, are very dysfunctional in what comes to just transitions. So we have many different proposals from civil society, academics, and so on how to revert, for example, subsides for fossil fuels, at least a percentage, turn them into just transition initiatives and resources, right? How to make the most of the financial resources that already exist, but they are not being used in an optimal way for developing countries. How to create fiscal space, for example, for developing countries that don't have them, that face much higher financial costs to implement climate action. So we are trying to be a little bit creative in the middle of all of this challenging context that we are right now. So the idea is not to create a mechanism that is empty. For example, okay, we have a very ambitious decision in Antalya, but we create a mechanism and no one is giving money for the mechanism. So it's not going to help. But how to, as we said, better coordinate to bring coherence to initiatives that already exist. How to make developing banks, for example, to work based on these just transition initiatives that Ümit said that are present in the preamble of the Paris Agreement and right now are in the COP30 decision. So we want that mechanism not only helps to bring just transition initiatives to life, based on the means of implementation, but also help to orchestrate just transition initiatives that's happening outside the convention, to give parameters, to give principles to these initiatives, even in what comes financial decisions, right? So how to give money in initiatives that are just, that are inclusive, that are responsible in what comes the protection of biodiversity, indigenous rights, and so on. So this is why we don't think we'll have a mechanism, a very ambitious mechanism that will count with additional financial resources. It will be like a dream, but we think that it's not going to happen. But at least to have a function of provide greater coherence in what comes the financial flows that already exist. Not sure if I properly answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatriz.
I can add one thing. I think the key is here that what Beatriz said, who take the financial decisions, right? Or simply saying who controls money. So I was in a global steel meeting about decarbonization in the steel sector. And the main discussion was about green premium. So green premium means producing green steel is a little bit more costly. So who will pay this small difference? which is called the green. Why green premium? I don't know, but green premium, companies, state, or the consumers. My intention, of course, not the consumers, not people. And the problem is, of course, this a very simple idea that polluters pay. So this kind of financial burden must be bear with by the companies first, and then must be regulated by the state. But of course, it's not very easy because it comes back to the question of who controls money. So who takes the financial decisions? So my simple answer, other than this, of course, policy around multilateral development banks, etc., it's very important. Or also there must be this windfall profit tax, etc. These are very important. There must be global taxes on the fossil fuel companies, etc. These are very, very important ideas, also put forward by some countries in the COPs a couple of years ago. But Jem, you know me that my intention was always doing that by politics, because changing who controls money could only be by a political change. And I don't think that the climate politics is a technocratic policy level thing. It is mainly, it must be a bottom up, it must be by the communities, it must be very political in terms of electoral politics, including electoral politics. It must be very political issue. And I think, yeah, we also need to understand that this slogan, system change, not climate change, is not just a slogan.
Thank you, Ümit. I should have also mentioned in the beginning by introducing you that you are from the Green Movement of Turkey as well. So you have tolerated my my mistake. Thank you for this. Now we have a question from the audience. Shahinder asks about the wildfires in France, and in the light of the forest fires in France, I think the French authorities made further statements emphasizing that in the face of global climate crisis, nature must not suffer such ecological devastation and that irreversible natural disasters must be avoided. And the authority had called for France to adjust its current policy accordingly. And also this call was for other countries. And she asks, will the COP31 summit take a step forward on this issue regarding the environmental devastation occurring in France and all other countries, thereby delivering a surprise? We can also remind the audience that right now, today, we had wildfires in multiple spots in Turkey, in Foça, in Altınoluk, in Seydi Kemer, Muğla. In the same day, we had wildfires. And we have also witnessed the very dramatic wildfires in Spain and France. We were just discussing with Beatriz about the situation in Amazonas, and she reminded it's the year of El Niño, and also extreme weather events are expected, unfortunately. We even had wildfires in Amazonas in recent years. So what would you like to reply to Shahinder's question? We had this the second roadmap on rainforests, on the protection of rainforests in COP30. And also we had a small agenda, as far as I remember, about the Mediterranean wildfires and protection of Forrest, I don't know whether you have had the chance to follow it because it's not such a big agenda. It wasn't. And how would you like to answer Shahinder's question in general?
Well, let me start if you want. Yeah, or
Yes,
Beatriz,
sure.
you can start too.
No, you
Okay.
can go. Thank you. Thank you, Ümit.
Yeah, this kind of first of all, El Nino didn't really start yet, so it's starting, but next year will be worse. So bad news. James Hansen just recently published an article that he said don't believe in this El Nino hype this year. It's going to start until the end of this year, and next year will be much worse. These kind of disasters made an impact in some of the COPs, if this is the question. I remember in 2013, the COP was in Warsaw, if I'm not wrong, yes. And there was just 2 days or 3 days before, the biggest typhoon happened in Philippines. And Haiyan typhoon. It was huge. Thousands of people were killed. Hundreds of thousands of people were, displaced, etc. It made a big impact in the beginning of the COP. Maybe it was one of the reasons. I think, if I'm not wrong, the loss and damage mechanism was discussed in that COP. That was one of the things, and also the Indonesian, not Indonesian, sorry, Philippine delegation lead was a very important also activist that time. He made a very moving speech in the opening plenary, etc. It had an impact, but I doubt that these kind of things would be really very important in the COPs. Why? I'm a bit skeptical about that. Why I'm skeptical? Because these kind of emotional things, the policymakers are really used to these kind of emotional things now. They are very, they have a very thick skin in this sense. They even use it. Like a couple of years ago, maybe you remember the EU chief negotiator used his granddaughter's pictures for something in a speech, and they did nothing after all. So, unfortunately, these things don't really work anymore. I'm a little bit sad about that. All in all the change so far came from bottom-up fight, including the Paris Agreement, including the 1.5 degrees and everything, just transition, loss and damage, and all the positive outcomes in the COPs was the so far were the outcomes of the joint effort of the civil society, from communities, and joint effort of these civil society and communities with the mostly small island states and some other small progressive states. Sometimes progressive states, of course, swing, like in Brazil. Sometimes Lula, sometimes Bolsonaro. Like Mexico, like South Africa, sometimes they swing, but still there are always some progressive states, and there are always these small island states, Caribbean states, Pacific states, etc. So together with working civil society, if they work together with the progressive states, it really works. Unfortunately, not the disasters anymore.
Thank you, Ümit. Beatriz?
I fully agree with Emmett. Unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic about a very ambitious decision in Antalya, given these extreme natural events. And the reasons are exactly the ones that Emmett mentioned, but also because these natural events are the consequence of what we already knew on climate change. I mean, we have the IPCC, which is the scientific panel on climate change, saying for so long that it's supposed to happen, given the high temperatures, if countries were unable to achieve very ambitious reductions of emissions. So this is the consequences. And we already have, as the COP30 presidency is always saying, we already have a very robust body of decisions that should guide implementation to much more ambitious climate action, both in terms of mitigation, which means the reduction of emissions, greenhouse gases emissions, but also in what comes adaptation, that is related to the ways that countries aim to adapt to the effects that are already felt of climate change. So I'm not so optimistic about a decision in COP31 in what comes these natural events, but maybe it can put pressure, it can be a call for implementation. It can put pressure in the action agenda, for example, or it can make like a warning to countries to make their NDCs, their national determined contributions, more ambitious in what comes adaptation, especially how to answer, how to respond to these very challenging ecological disasters. So I don't think we'll have a decision in Antalya, but maybe one more call to implementation. And I think it strengthened the Brazilian vision on what the climate regime should look like right now in the age of implementation. COP30 presidency has defending the idea on a two-tier multilateralism, the preservation of a consensus-based negotiation spaces within the convention, within COPs, but more flexible ways to implement, and the roadmap is a product. The roadmaps, the transition away from fossil fuel roadmap and the deforestation roadmap are products of this new process. So let's hope that we can have more ambitious actions after this.
Thank you, Beatriz. We have one more question from Bahar Hanım. Given that the transition away from fossil fuels is likely to be one of the COP31's main tests, what concrete steps should Turkey take before Antalya, both internationally and in its domestic climate policies, to demonstrate that the 35 to 35 electrification target will be driven by renewable energy and support the transition away from fossil fuels? And this is for Ümit.
Yes, thank you, Bahar. It's a tough question, like tough. I think I already said in my speech that I think Turkey already showed its flexibility on the tough agenda. And internationally, now other parties must lead. I really think so. Who the other parties? As I said before, the EU, because somehow they avoid, I don't know why. The UK and other progressive countries must take the lead to support Turkey for advancing tough agenda, including the roadmap, including connecting tough with electrification, etc. If they systematically work together with the Turkish presidency, also with the Australian presidency, that would work. I really believe that. But if they try to use, I don't want to be very open, but if they try to use Turkey's presidency as an excuse for inaction, I mean EU, etc., because of their military expenditure, etc., that would be a biggest mistake, let me say. Okay, so I think internationally, other countries must take the lead. Domestically, the answer is very clear. Turkey must do three things domestically. The first, Turkey must say something about coal phase out. It doesn't have to be with a year even. I'm so humble. Normally, Turkey should have a coal phase out target for 2035, I think. According to our own modeling studies, 35 is a very realistic year. But still, even without a year before the COP would work, just mentioning that Turkey will have a coal phase out target soon. Also announcing an update in NDC after the COP. I don't expect any updated COP before this, updated NDC before this COP. I know that it's not really possible, but at least saying something about we are going to update this NDC for a better decarbonization roadmap, more consistent with 2053 target, etc. This could be the second thing. And also, I would also add one more thing, saying something about a national transitioning away from fossil fuels roadmap, at least together with the next NDC, like kind of committing itself until the next NDC, having a national tough roadmap. These three, in terms, I had other ideas about other topics, but at least these three for the fossil fuel phase out target would make Turkey's presidency probably the most progressive so far. So I think maybe I'm dreaming a little bit, but this must be Turkey's way.
Thank you, Ümit. Actually, Murat Kurum, the COP31 president and the minister, implied twice answering the questions of our colleagues from Greenpeace, Emel and Berkan, that there will be a coal phase out, but it was just that, so it didn't go beyond. Thank you. And yeah, your joke about tough being tough, I also heard it in your webinar in IPC. I would recommend to our guests here that they should follow the IPC webinars as well to have the jokes of Ümit in their first when he makes them first for the first time. Okay, I told you that it was my last question, but I have one question I would like to ask you to answer very briefly. What is the one thing you will be watching between now and November? And then we are finishing.
Sarjan, what's the one thing that we will be watching until November?
Yeah, what makes you mostly curious about how the agenda will develop politically in terms of the emergence of the COP31 agenda or other developments?
I'm very curious to see how this double presidency which is the first one that we have since the beginning of the COP cycle, is going to be delivered, because I think that these two presidencies are still trying to accommodate and try to see how they will work together and how they will share their tasks. Even if we have at least discursively separated agendas for both of them. So I'm curious about this interaction about the Turkish and Australian presidency, and also curious about what Emmett said on the resistance of these two presidencies in what come the roadmaps. Because I think that the roadmaps could be a topic that brings together both Turkish and Australian presidencies, because they can be seen as a bridge between the negotiation process that didn't advance as we wish and the action agenda, the implementation space. So I'm curious about these two issues.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Beatriz.
My answer is obvious, as I already said. The tough agenda is most curious one for me, actually. What is going on, how it will advance, or if, I don't know, I don't think so, but if someone wants to really kill it, because that would be the biggest risk. I hope they don't, but this is the most interesting part of this year's COP.
Thank you, Ümit. I will thank you both, and I'm already looking forward for the next opportunity we will come together again. And our webinar series will continue hopefully until COP, or even maybe after it, for the evaluations and so on. And I'm looking forward also to meeting you in Antalya. Beatriz will also come over. And also for our guests here, thank you for your participation. I would make a reminder, please follow the IPC publications and webinars. You can have them on YouTube, on Spotify, and also on the webpage of IPC. And Plataforma CIPÓ has also very interesting publications. You can reach on their website also in English. It's also in English. Again, thank you very much for all your contributions.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.